Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kripthirteen, and today I want to talk about the Lithic Spear. So the effects of the Lithic Spear were revealed around mid-February, and they've changed massively from their placeholder effects. I should mention that it's not just the Lithic Spear, but the Lithic line in general. So in this video, I'm gonna go over some calculations with the Lithic Spear when we put it on Xiao. And even though we're just doing it for Xiao, I think we'll definitely be able to see how well it's going to perform to other spears and how it's going to perform on other characters as well. And so before we begin, just for reference, the effects of the Lithic Spear before it was actually released increased physical damage, and its passive effect increased your charge attack damage randomly whenever you hit normal attacks. It was quite weird, and I'm really glad that it changed. So the Lithic Spear is a type 44 weapon, meaning it is the highest base attack out of all 4-star weapon types. It will increase your base attack by 565 at level 90, and its main stat is an attack percent bonus. It will boost your attack by an extra 27.6% at level 90. This is quite a low multiplier compared to most, but it's like that because it has a high base attack value. Usually they'll try to balance these two stats out by lowering the base and increasing the main stat multiplier, or in this case lowering the main stat because the base is at its max for a 4-star. And then lastly, the passive effects on the Lithic Spear is that you will get an attack increase and a crit rate increase for each Liwa character that is on your team, up to a maximum of 4 stacks. So obviously this means that if you equip it onto a Liwa character, you will get 1 stack, and you'll probably want to aim for at least 3 Liwa characters when you use this weapon. That being said, in this video, I'm going to compare the differences when you just have 1 stack versus 3 stack and 4 stacks. I am mainly going to compare this to the Blackcliff pole and see how it stacks up to the Jade Spear. Without even doing any calculations yet, I can already see the potential for this weapon because of the insane amount of attack percent it can give on top of the extra crit rate that it gives. This allows us to put more resources into crit damage and relieves us of some of the headache from farming crit rate on our artifact subsets. And even at higher refinements, this weapon just gets absolutely crazy amounts of attack percent and crit rate. So I might be gushing right now, but there are negatives to this weapon too. It's going to force you to build your team with Liwa characters, which limits your team options. If you love Liwa characters and the teams that you have already use lots of Liwa characters, then that's pretty good. You're gonna love this weapon. But as the game grows into the future and we get more and more characters that can hail from different regions, the weapon could fall off. So as it stands right now, this weapon looks really good, but if you plan to play this game in the long term, it's going to severely limit your options. Being forced to use Liwa characters could definitely burn you out if they don't add more to the Liwa lineup. So keep those things in mind. Alright, so now let's take a look at the numbers. So first off is going to be his non-burst attacks, and here let's just ignore the Crescent Pike because its physical damage is completely inflated from its main stat bonus and its passive skill. When we include burst damage, it completely falls off. So we can see here that the Lithic Spear performs just under the Blackcliff pole. So if you've watched my previous video on Xiao's weapon analysis, you'll know the pros and cons of the Blackcliff. This weapon is outperforming the Skyward Spine in terms of damage, even including the extra passive damage. The only extra thing that the Spine has is more energy recharge, an 8% boost to crit rate, and a 12% increase to attack speed, where the attack speed can definitely help it. However, from the graphs, the raw numbers are very much lower than the Lithic Spear at higher stacks. Now, more importantly, look at how close it performs to the Jade Spear at higher stacks. Imagine the Lithic Spear with more refinement. It's definitely going to outperform an R1 Jade Spear. Now, looking over at the burst plunging attack damage, this first one just looks at the damage when we don't hit crits. And as expected, it will beat the Blackcliff pole because the Blackcliff has a lower base attack and attack percent boost. What's surprising here is how slightly it beats the Jade Spear at full stacks, and how close it is even at 3 stacks, which means we aren't actually forced to use a full Liwa team with this weapon. Moving over to the crit damage side of things, the Blackcliff is going to edge out because of the crit damage main stat, just as expected. But again, look at how close the Lithic Spear is performing to the Jade Spear. It is quite surprising. So now that we've identified that the Lithic Spear can definitely hang out with the big boy weapons like the Jade Spear and the Blackcliff pole, let's do some direct comparisons. So this next graph is a direct comparison with the Jade Spear at max stacks versus the Lithic Spear at 3 stacks. And we can even more clearly see how closely the Lithic Spear is performing with just 3 stacks. Whether we're in our burst mode or whether we're not in our burst mode, the Lithic Spear really does compete pretty well with the Jade Spear. And then when we move over to 4 stacks, it's nearly indistinguishable, and in some cases the Lithic Spear actually just slightly edges out. Now let's take a look at the Blackcliff versus the Lithic Spear. So let's first compare a Blackcliff at 0 stacks and then a Lithic Spear at 1 stack. Really only when the Blackcliff is at 0 stacks does the Lithic Spear at 1 stack compete with the weapon. So in most cases, 1 stack Lithic Spear is not going to be that great. But of course, I think this is to be expected with a 1 stack Lithic Spear. It's not surprising, and you probably shouldn't use a 1 stack Lithic Spear when you have a lot of better choices to choose from. And as you can see, as we increase the number of stacks on the Blackcliff pole, the damage difference really does increase by a decent amount. More specifically, at 1 stack for the Lithic Spear, the difference in damage between it and a 3 stack Blackcliff pole is about 20% damage, and you'll only be getting a 3% crit rate. So to reiterate, it's probably not going to be worth it to use a Lithic Spear over the Blackcliff if you're just using one Lewa character. Now let's take a look at the 3 stack Lithic and the 4 stack Lithic, which is definitely going to be much more interesting. So with 3 stacks on the Lithic Spear and with 4 stacks on a Lithic Spear, all of your non-crit damages are going to do more damage than the Blackcliff. But then when it comes to crit damage, the Lithic Spear is going to do less damage, but again, this is to be expected because the Blackcliff pole has crit damage main stat. However, even though it looks like there's quite a sizable gap, the actual damage difference between a 3 stack Lithic Spear and a 3 stack Blackcliff pole is only about 12% damage. And remember that with a 3 stack Lithic Spear, we're going to be getting 9% crit rate at R1. And then at 4 stacks, the damage difference is only 9% with an extra 12% crit rate exchange. And then it's also important to know that the Lithic Spear's passive is 100% uptime, whereas the Blackcliff pole is going to depend on what enemies you're fighting. I mentioned this in a lot of my videos, but sometimes we just need a reminder. If you fight only one enemy, you're going to be stuck with the Blackcliff pole with no stacks. And if you're only fighting 2 or 3, then your stacks are definitely going to suffer. So what are my final conclusions about the Lithic Spear? Based off what we've seen from the charts and the graphs, does this mean that the Lithic Spear is just as good as the Jade Spear? Well, I think that the absurd amount of attack percent that this weapon gets gives its damage numbers on par with the Jade Spear. However, the only thing that we're missing with the Lithic Spear is the extra crit rate. At Refinement 1, we're only going to get a max of 12% when we have 4 stacks versus 22% on the Jade Spear. So at R1, it kind of is like a budget Jade Spear. You're going to be missing about 10% crit rate. However, since this is a 4-star weapon, you can refine this much more easily than the Jade Spear. So once you hit R4 for the Lithic Spear, you're going to be getting 24% crit rate with 4 stacks and even more attack percent. And at that point, it's definitely going to outperform the Jade Spear. And of course, guys, when I say it's going to outperform the Jade Spear, I mean a R1 Jade Spear. Because it being a 5-star, any refinements on the Jade Spear is going to be due to insane luck or just massive amounts of money spent. So that's why when I compare to 5-star weapons, I usually just go with the R1 version. Now, what about the conclusions with the Lithic versus the Blackcliff? I definitely recommend you watch my Xiao weapon analysis video if you want a more detailed explanation on the pros and cons of the Blackcliff pole, but in essence, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to whether or not you want higher crit damage numbers more randomly, or if you want more consistent crit at lower damage. At higher stacks, the Lithic Spear is only underperforming the Blackcliff pole at max stacks, which is 3, by only about 12 to 9%. So you should weigh whether or not you think that that extra damage is worth the extra crit rate with the Lithic. And to round things off, if we just take a holistic view of all of the damage between these weapons by stacking everything on top of each other, we can see that these weapons all pretty much perform very similarly to each other, so you honestly can't really go wrong with any weapon. It's definitely just going to come down to personal preference. Of course, these numbers are done with Xiao, so this is definitely just in Xiao's case, but I think that this pattern is probably going to hold relatively true for most of the other spear users in this game. And again, I think that with refinement, the Lithic Spear is going to be a very good choice, and it's definitely going to outperform any of the other spears with higher refinement. This is because unlike the Blackcliff pole, when you refine the Lithic Spear, the passive is going to always be active, whereas with the Blackcliff, you have to kill enemies in order to get benefit from refining the Blackcliff pole. So guys, take all of these things into account when you decide which weapon to use. They are honestly all great choices, and I don't think there's a best one because each one has its pros and cons. Really, the only main thing that I see here is to not give MiHoYo your hard-earned money for the 5-star Jade-winged Spear, in my honest opinion. If you got the weapon with luck, then that's great, but I feel kind of bad for people who spend money to get this weapon. Obviously, if you refine the Jade Spear, it's going to be great and it's going to be better, but that's a whole lot of moolah. I have not yet wailed on this game yet, so that's why I kind of have this perspective on this game, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with that. But again, yes, in my honest opinion, I think that R1 5-star weapons definitely get outshined by refined 4-star weapons. So anyway guys, this is the end of the video. If you liked it, then don't forget to leave me a like and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. It's definitely going to help me out a lot. And don't forget to leave me a comment on what you guys think about the Lithic Spear. Anyway, until next time, I will see you later.